Good morning and welcome to another edition of GM Tips. This is GM Rick here. I hope you're having a great end of your weekend. We just finished up the weekend of the 12th of September, so kind of give you a time frame if you ever want to date the videos. This September 16th or September 12th, the 16th. Rough weekend of remembering September 11th. Geez, never a fun thing to remember, and it's definitely something you got to do, but it's not always something you enjoy doing. So I had a good weekend with my game with Reign of Winter, and today it kind of spawned some topics for me to think about and really talk about, because there are some things that came out of the session that I think are very important, and things that I think will help. Again, regardless of system, this is system neutral, whether it's D&D 5e, Pathfinder, Numenera, Fate, Savage Worlds, no matter what system, GURPS. These are just things in general that you can utilize. Now, some of them I'll refer to maybe specific systems, but others I'm going to just leave in the air to you to really utilize the system you're using and knowing your system. And I think the number one thing, and again, this is going to skip from players to GM, GM to players. So if you feel like your players should watch this, please advise your players and your groups to watch it. I'm going to put a little thing saying for GMs and players both, because I think it's really important to know when there are tips for both. And this one, I'm going to start off a little bit with the players. And again, no offense to you guys. It's just, I'm just the way I'm thinking this one through. Don't have any specific agendas that I'm picking up on. And forgive me, any GM. Like I say, you always get her in the background at some point with something going on. She's watching Octonauts this morning. So, first thing, and for players, I think this is, something that I've hit on before, but I really feel like a deeper dive into this is important. I think that there are three things that a player really needs to come with when they come to a game. Come with enthusiasm. You're playing your favorite thing to do. So come with enthusiasm to your game. Come excited and ready to go. Really, it's okay, whether it's sharing banter a little bit at the table or focusing on just the gameplay itself. Come excited and ready to come. And don't really be negative on either one. Unfortunately, players forget sometimes that how they respond to things and their attitude and their very way that they handle things is acceptable or unacceptable. And I'm going to lay it out as a GM. It is not acceptable as a player for you to come with snarkiness or an attitude. And it's never acceptable. And again, it's not picking on anyone. This came up because one of the players was this way in the session, and it just brings it to mind for me. So I'm going to address it for all GMs and players to help the game to be better. Snarkiness is never acceptable, okay? And if you're going to come with an attitude built in that you're going to just rip into your fellow players or GMs, or if you're going to say little catchphrase things to get them moving forward in the game, or because you don't like something that's going on, or because your time is limited, do me a favor, check yourself at the door. It's not acceptable, and it's not something that you just go, well, I'm sorry, but this is happening. But now that's the other thing. Don't say but, okay? If you're sorry, you're sorry. If you're not, you're not. Don't veil a sorry with I'm sorry, but. And I hate that because I do it too. I'm guilty of it. I'm sorry, but. There is no but. If you're sorry, you're sorry. If you're not, you're not. But do me a favor, don't do that. Because what you do is you set a tone that then can either make the game really sideways or awkward. And it's not fair to a player to do that, your fellow players to do that, and it's not fair for a player to do that. Snarkiness, whether and again, the people who are rules people are going, yay, he's not going after me today. No, I'm going after snarkiness, because snarkiness is the negativity that comes in, and it's I don't know. I could pull where the emotions that draw it from, bring it from, but I don't think that's what this needs to be about. Just check the snarkiness at the door. Play with the group. it will take the flow it's meant to take. And the GM will try to keep it on track. Interruptions happen. Look, that's the other thing as a player. Interruptions happen. You're playing on a weekend. Most people have significance. Most people have someone else involved in their life or whatever. And if something important comes along, let's be honest, folks. They don't share our passion often in the game. If you got somebody who does, that's awesome and games with you. It's a lot easier then. But if you don't, then respect the person. Um, Especially, if you're in their home. Number one, they're opening their home to you. Number two, they're taking their time as well to do things for you. And number three, don't come back with comments like, well, if you want to take a break from this, we can go to another home, or we can if you want to take a break, somebody else can GM. I'm sorry, and I'm going to harp on that one a little bit because I had one of my players say that to me. Do me a favor, shut your mouth. That is the word. Do you understand how condescending that is? When a GM puts their time into the game for you, to create the game for you, and to do all those things, do me a favor, check that as well. That's just not a comment you need to be making. All right. And I think something, again, I know some people hate that because they want me to stay to the facts and the rules of the game and whatever. I get it. But these are things that you're going to run into. And I'm afraid, GMs, you will run into these things. And you have got to be able to deal with them. And deal with them in a way that is respectable. Now, because the player says that, does not give you the right to just waylay them. All right. No GM should ever waylay a player because they throw out a just off the cuff, insensitive comment. And that's what those comments are. They're insensitive. They don't take into account anyone else's emotions but you. And you're focused on you, player, when you are being snarky or you're being like that. You are focused on you. Cut it out. It is a game of us, not you. Okay? Your enjoyment is based on us. And if the us factor isn't working, guess what's going to happen? Someone's going to ask you to go to the door and leave and never come back. And that's going to inadvertently happen. And GMs, at some point, you got to know when to do that. Because, again, I want it to be fun for all players, and we need to try to do everything in our power to make sessions to where players come back and we adapt ourselves to the needs of our players. But at some point, you got to look at that element and say, you know what, dude, why don't you find somewhere else to play, or gal, why don't you find somewhere else to play? And you hate that because then they get a negative experience. But there comes a point of no return, and that you just got to gauge when that is. But I think so. The three things: leave the snarkiness at the door. Don't make rude and offhand comments just because it's your solution to your selfishness and what you want, player. And GM, know when to draw a line and when to say enough. Um, I'd say come appreciative. I've got one player, and well, actually two of them. I've got two, and a third that is this way, I believe, too, and a fourth that can be this way. So I'm not going to say I have one, but I have a couple outstanding ones and others that are really good at it. Okay, so I'm fortunate I have multiples of these people that are courteous and bring things. They ask, "What do you need? Hey, if you ever need anything, just let me know before the session. I'll bring it. Um, I will do anything that can help the session to be great. That we can have great refreshments and great other things." Man, praise those players up and down. Really do, because they are a rare gift. And those kind of players are just beautiful people. And players, as you're listening to this, keep that in mind. Think of others before you think of yourself. You want to make a game session really epic, think of everyone outside of you. Others will think of you too, I promise. It's infectious that if one player is selfless, so go the other ones eventually. And you get just a real nice avalanche of uh, kindness and great etiquette. So, players, think of your GM, think of the people there. I'm not saying to spend lots of money. It's not about spending. It's about just the attitude. I want to give back to the game. I want to make this special. And I think that's just a great attitude when you come into a game. And so whether you're GMing or playing, if you think of others outside of yourself, it really expands the game to another level. And that's hard to do sometimes because look, we have long weeks. We have hard things that go on in our life. Our dating, engagement, marriage is not always a happy place. And so our lives can be messy things, and we come to game to get some fun and relief. But at the same time, we got to be careful not to be selfish about that. Be more giving than selfish. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and it's really true. It's a statement that it's a little. It's not even a biblical proverb. It's just a proverb. Okay, it's just proverb in life that is just a great proverb that's really true because you don't want to be sour and chase people away. You want to be sweet and bring people in, and that's what makes the session so great. I've been spoiled, and I really want to lift up the group that I'm running on a one shot or actually a two shot. The attitude in that group is infectious of fun, and yeah, there is some gameplay, just hilarity, and people are playing their characters up to a just a fun spinning little nasty role at times, but towards each other they're really positive, and I love it. I'm gonna miss it when it goes away. Honestly, I really am, because these people are some great people, and you get fortunate every once in a while to get a group of all these kind of individuals that have that personality that I want to give to the game as well as make great role play. And those are people that you really got to just hold up. And I've got, fortunately, a lot of them in my home game too. And there's don't get me wrong, the one that bore some negativity, he's not always this way, but there are times when it just shows, and it call it what you want to call it in the person, but it just it when it comes up and rears its head, whether it's with one player or another, it's just not a good thing. Um, so that's on that portion of it. GMs in gameplay. Um, really make sure you're tailoring sessions that hit all the players' needs. Even though you're designing a campaign that you want them to follow a storyline and you want them to follow a main plot that they're trying to achieve or a main goal, and you have all the obstacles, and then they're playing it out with their responses and all the other things that go on, like we've talked about before. Sometimes tailoring a session towards a player or players is a fun thing. Now, again, you're gonna miss a little bit with some of your other players that want to do some other things. But here's the point: you can tailor a session to mainly meet one set of players' needs without leaving out the other players. You can put in parts, and so what I find is, okay, don't have heavily diplomatic sessions with no action. If you do that, you're going to lose some players because you always will have your action players that love the action and the combat and then the whole buildup of that section. Um, don't have a session of just action and no diplomacy, no chances for the players to get more skill based than combat based or role play based. Don't forget great role play and theatric sessions that have that. You got to have all those kind of dynamics in between. And even when you're doing a pre-generated adventure, think about, all right, I've got these type of players. What can I tailor for each one in here that's going to make it just fun and memorable for each player? I'm guilty of that sometimes, that I don't go through and do that. And this last session, I kind of did that, but not as much as I normally do. It was more combat heavy. And so that's to one or two of the players, that was beautiful. I mean, for them, they're like, wow, this is great. The rest of them, it kind of wasn't as much fun. But there were some points where I threw in some hitches and different things that made it more fun. Did I have it all fleshed out? Oh, heck no. No, I didn't. A lot of this came on the creative fly of thinking about that player's need and what I could do. Now, from that's going to come another thing. Know your game mechanics, GMs. I'm guilty of this. I give credit to one of my players who studied the combat round, and he really did a deep dive. And I appreciate that because he and another guy are really good at this. And there's a third guy who wasn't there, but he's also really good at this. The three of them keep us honest. and I love that. But I mean, he put into check a player that wanted to go do things that they shouldn't do. And GMs, you bring this on yourself. Number one, your players will take advantage of you if you don't understand the base mechanics at some point. Now, beginning and starting out, they have a little more grace, but after a while, they're going to take advantage of it. And to that player who did that, just know I've studied the mechanics now and I've made me charts of all of what's what. And it's not going to happen to the best of my ability going forward. I'm going to change up a little bit because I've been guilty and remiss in a lot of areas to my players. And I'm going to change that. And not that I'm going to be rules intensive heavy. I'm just going to make sure I understand everything as well as I need to on the basic mechanics. I thought I did. And let's be honest, sometimes we do that. We think we know. And we go back and go, crud, I blew that, didn't I? And so now I've got some things that I can sit down and follow. But GMs really know the mechanics of your system, at least the ones that count when it's into a combat session or into a round intensive set portion of the session. You got to make sure you understand that. Now, I know some of you say, well, let's go to the freer systems that don't do that. That's fine too. But even in that, you want to kind of keep an ebb and flow. And you want to make sure you understand enough of the dynamics that you're not screwing things up because your players will take advantage of it. I don't care how honest of individuals they are, they just do. It's the nature of the beast. And shame on you players that do it, but it it happens. And how should they say they'll take an inch every time they'll take a mile every time you give them an inch. And so don't do that. You've got to, I hate to say you got to have a corral, but you kind of do. You got to have that framework corral. Otherwise, people just go off the deep end. And I'm saying this to open system people too, as you create. Remember that by throwing that dynamic out, what you have done now is open the floodgates of chaos. Because what's going to happen is players will take advantage of your system in huge ways, and it will frustrate some GMs. It's going to. Because we want to have a fun game, but we want to have some boundaries. It's kind of like a parent with kids. We want to have some boundaries because those boundaries help you in life. Boundaries are not bad things. I know creatives hate them, and I'm a creative myself, but I've learned to love boundaries. Boundaries are things that help you to know when you're going too far off the edge with creativity. And you can do that. You really can. Some people don't think that you can, but you can. So know your system. GMs also write up enough tables and encounters, but don't let that throw your flow. You've got to keep a flow in your mind fluidly of what's happening. Even if someone takes you somewhere you haven't been, you have got to in your mind organize stuff enough that you keep a flow. And that's, I think, for a game story, the most important thing is there has to be a cohesive flow. And there's got to be humor with it, and you can put in little humorous things and humorous sayings and everything else to keep the flow fun and funny. But like we had a guy that went up against some Sagathi, and some Sagathi came up. And Sagathi, if you've ever looked at them, are nasty little critters. They came through one of the windows, freaking everybody out. Hence the madness again. But even with the sanity checks, one of the guys, and it's just fortunate I was running with him, criticaled so massively. And for those of you that don't like Cryptex, let me tell you something. I have found just the opposite of what you guys think of it. And so I'm going to preach on the side a little bit on the cards. If you haven't picked up the Paizo, criticals and fumbles, do. Whatever system you're using, do. I'm just telling you, it's hilarious. This one, I pulled the one where it says decapitation. Creature must make a reflex save of this, or they are instantly decapitated. Well, guess what happened to the Sagathi? He missed by one. With all the other magical things up that were protecting them and causing the creatures to have negatives on things, he missed. And so it was epic. The Sagathi head went. And one of the guys said, that was so good. I think we should gain sanity back. And I sat there for a minute and I said, you do. You gain a point of sanity back. Because you realize these creatures, though way out in orbit, What you did was so on the positive side of understanding that they are beatable. That gave you sanity. And so when they beat the next one, they gained some more. And that comes to the improvisation. DMs and GMs, you don't have to always rigidly just lockstep the rules. If something epic happens and you think about it, give some little awards to the players for pulling a great card. Now, somebody would say, well, that wasn't their idea, it was the cards. The card inspired people to think outside the box and have a great time. The players were talking about it for rounds afterwards. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but in my mind, those cards make the difference. And we had that day, I rolled an epic 9 natural 20s. No joke. 9 natural 20s and 2 ones, but 9 of them. And so, what does that tell you? It was an epic day. People say, well, you feast and famine off of them. Yeah, you do, but when they come, when the criticals come, and the other players had 4 to 6 of them themselves, and so as a group, that was epic. So on their side, they had 2 criticals against them, and they had 13 for them. So where is this lopsided against the party? And see, that's where GMs sometimes they'll justify and say, well, it always goes against the party, and those naturally end up ruining characters and this and that. I get it. I get it. You don't like the cards. You like somebody else to tell their story and be more freeform. Fine. What I find, the cards inspire eventually that freeformness, because then they become savvy on what can happen when you critical. And so for me, I love it. And I still let them do the description. Hey, he does this. If I'm running the NPC or if I'm running the monster, I'll tell them what happens. If they're running it, have at it. If it's your fumble, if it's your critical, tell me what happened. You know the framework. They gave you the framework from the card. Tell me how it happened. Like one of the players rolled a critical where he basically cuts him in half at the abdomen. Okay, he said, I went flying through him with my falcata and I ripped him from stem to stern down the center, which would have been this way, but that's fine. I let him go that way. And hey, that's all good. Have fun with your descriptions because that's part of the fun. But use the cards. Do use them. I don't know why people don't. I use condition cards. I love them. I flip them out there. Somebody says, oh no, I'm dazed. Here you go. I'm stunned. Here you go. So they know the rules. They're written on the cards. It's real easy. And then they're like, wow, this is great. And you're teaching them the rules as you're throwing those cards out. I want to get some of the rules cards too, because for me, I like that they have something that I can just throw out there and show them. Make your own cards. If you don't have cards, make your own. Take the critical deck, make it for your system. Just take it and convert it. It's all good, but have something like that. There is something about that. Ooh, if I get that draw, this could be really fun. And it is. It's like getting a surprise on your birthday. It's just that boom, spontaneous. And players aren't always thinking, look, they're thinking 12 other things about the game. So then when you go to them and say, tell me what happens, they're going, and it happens. It's not as fun. Where if you give them a card with a little, it's like, what is it? Cards Against Humanity. When you give them the little bit of leeway, what happens? It blows up in a good way. And so keep that in mind. Some other things that for players, I would say really take the time to think about your next steps of what your character would do in character. Be careful of going against your character's character. And sometimes you create a persona and yet you contradict it to fit the situation. Be very careful of that. Because what you do, that's like people would say it's out of character for a person to be a certain way in real life. It's out of character for a character to be out of character. Character. Can I say it 50 times? Character, character, character. But be in character. Think about if you were in this person's shoes, being of this character's mindset you created, where would your next step go? And sometimes that's hard because our characters are so opposite of us as human beings. So it means you got to think through scenarios and different things. I love that one of my players really, every time, creates his character and thinks. Like, for instance, a perfect example. The shop that they're in is getting attacked, all right? And they've dealt with what's inside. So what does the rogue do? He's not worried about what's coming down the street at them. Not yet. He goes back into, Payman goes back into the rooms and starts trying to feel around and find more traps on the doors, how to unlock the doors. Now, fault on me. I should have made his rounds longer. So, Payman, you got away with some things. Won't happen next time. That's on me. Okay. But for the sake of it, it was fine. Okay. It happened. It went. I'm not going to go back and change anything. It's my fault. So that goes back to the GM knowing the rules and how long things take. But he's back there fiddling with disarming spell traps and opening locks to chests and finding out what's inside of them and identifying them while the party's out there fighting the battle. That's part of his character. I don't down him for it. His character is his character. And yet the party has come to understand him. Sometimes they roll their eyes at him. Sometimes they but when it comes to things that count, Payman counts. And Max doesn't go against his character just because the party doesn't like something. That said, when you create a character, don't create a bonehead, okay? One that's just an absolute jerk to the party. It's different playing in character and being a little roguey and everything. It's different from being a jerk. So really just think about playing your character and what would they do. Max does that, and he's real good about it. And he, to the nth degree, really plays out his characters. And I think people love that. And now they're becoming much more like that as their characters. And there's some other players that are already like that. I mean, Josh and Brian play their characters as they see them being played out. Now, sometimes it goes against a little bit even of their class and their alignment, but that's how their character is. So that's a dicey little match they have to do, and I'm okay with that as a GM because you got to let people have a little bit of leeway to be creative with what they want to do. But at the same time, you got to remind them of the boundaries. Hey, if you go too far this way, you're going to lead this way. Just keep that in mind, so that they understand that even in that character's moral dilemmas, there is a too far, and that too far will take you over the edge. And so you got to remind players of that. But players, you got to have some fun and play your characters out and don't just make them one-dimensional cardboard. You've got to have some dimension to them. And so in doing so, you got to think out ahead. And this is where in a game session, your mind's spinning. And you've got to think of that. You don't lose track of what's going on, but you're spinning. Your mind's spinning on, okay, in that situation, what would they do? How would they react? I had one that went against a little bit of what her better judgment was, but she thought about it. I'm small, and I can dart in and out of these really big things that can do some massively nasty things to me. Or I can just stay up here and snipe them. And she stayed up and sniped them. And that's it. Look, it went against a little bit of her nature of her class because she is a swashbuckler, but she's also not dumb. And she's not just going to run into the fray to dance around with her little sword when she's going to end up dead. She's not that way. She's not stupid. She is resourceful. And she said, that's why I've also taken up a bow as a backup, is because it's another way that I can rain death down. And so keep that in mind, that players and characters don't take them outside of how they would normally react, because then it gets confusing on your character's character. And finally, I think at the end of the day, really try to take the story where you guys want to take it and write it in a way that you almost want to write it. The GM's there to guide that story and help provide the framework of it, but you guys on the player side are the writers of the story. And so players, you got to keep that in mind. Your GM isn't there to just force the story down your throat.
Yes, there is a cadence that story is going to take if you don't step up and take it the way you want to take it. And don't go to wreck the story. All right. I know some players that are real good at that just want to just wreck the story. That's not it either. Write the story. Don't wreck. Take the story and write it. Put your caveats on it. Put your footnotes in it. Put your things into that story that's going to say, this is our story. The GM had a story, but we've made it our story. That's what makes it so much fun for a GM in most cases. And GMs, you got to be flexible for that. You've got to let the characters write their story. Their story may not turn out how the books intended it, how the writers of the books said it's going to go, or the modules or anything else you're running. That's fine. That's where GMing comes in. You are the person that then arbiters helping that story to flesh out the way they want. It doesn't mean give them carte blanche. When they're writing their story, certain things aren't going to jive. And you've got to just make it clear. Look, I know you want to write it this way. This section of the track has a big old do not enter, track ends. And you've got to say that sometimes. And it's no fun, but there are times when you got to do that. But just don't make it every time. Try to limit that, but you want to say, where will this story go? It's like a never ending story. You can rewrite it 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways. When you play an adventure path, the outcome should never be the same twice. It just shouldn't. It's like playing some of the open content video games, RPGs. They intend it so the story doesn't end the same every time. And you shouldn't expect that either as GM. Uh, but understand when you take the players, they're the ones writing the story. You put in some footnotes too for the NPCs and for some of the towns and things like that. But I love one of the things that Wolfgang Bauer said. He has this system with Midgard, and one of the things he said is he came up with the framework of the world, but the history changed because of the players. So when you read his Midgard campaign, it wasn't Midgard. It didn't have a name. He'll tell you. I didn't have any of that fleshed out. And the writing of it came from how the players did and what they did and the interactions. So a lot of the story took the generating move on what the party was doing. It's the same way with if you're playing Pathfinder with the Inner Sea. The Inner Sea history will change depending on how the players go. Now, they're going to keep the history the same in their books for cohesiveness. You can rewrite it as a GM. Paizo doesn't say keep the story the same. You don't have to. You can make your own footnotes and write your own off timeline of it, of how it went. And that's okay. Everybody's is a different timeline of that. And that's the thing is you're writing your campaign, even your homebrew ones. Your campaign will take its form on depending on how the party writes the story. So write the story with it and continue the ongoing story of that world with it. That's the epic part of it is the party's made their mark on it, and it will be forever remembered because of what they did. And so that's the great part about running a system or a campaign is they make the mark and write the history. And you're doing that. And that's a great thing you can do, players. Keep in mind, you will write that history. And how do you want it to read? Don't go wonky and weird and just have it all over the place. I mean, humor in it's fun. And I love some great humor and mirth in the story because it makes for some great fireside stories. But also have a little seriousness with it too. Of we're molding this world here. We are really taking the history of it and changing it and either making it for the better or the worse. And so we want to make sure we write it in such a way that it's memorable. I think that's it. I know I've hit a lot of different topics. I think the topic I'm going to say for this today is um, highlights on things that often need to be addressed in gaming. And I think it's a good title for it. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong in it, but I think it is highlights. I think highlights on things that often need to be addressed in gaming and GMing. And I think it hits the different things. Again, sometimes I'm going to rehash some topics as I rethink them a little bit. Please forgive me on that. But as they say, things get better over time. I really believe that. I think I'm able to think things through in my GM tips even more as I have more of them than I do. And so I hope this helps you. And players, please, and if any of my players view this, please understand, guys, I enjoy you as a group beyond all belief. and I wouldn't trade any of you. But that said, the things I do address in here, they're things I see. And you can either take the tidbit from it and run with it, or you can ignore me and say, whatever, Rick, and move on. It's up to you what you do. And the same with you guys who don't know me. It's up to you what you do. But I think sometimes little tidbits and insights are good things. If you take away a few of them and really look at them and say, wow, okay, he's helping me to get better at my craft, it's not a bad thing. I listen, believe me. Um, and I listen more times than people ever think I do because you watch me evolve as a GM. And that's what I've been doing and ever doing since the beginning. So have a great week. Thank you for tuning in to the madness, and we'll see you again soon.